So, unfortunately, you're in detention. Now, the task for the day isn't too bad. There have been detentions that are worse, but you will have to clean the library. Luckily, in some capacity, you're on the top floor at a library, so it's fairly quiet here, mostly just studious types minding their own business and kind of milling through books. As you're looking around, you happen upon a book on a high shelf, the whole shelf covered in dust, but this book catches your eye. Along the leather black spine of the book, there's a silver filigree that almost looks like webbing. And as you kind of help each other climb up and grab that book, I mean, you're not only going to clean while you're here, you brush off some of the dust on the cover, and it says Nivixdeen and the Swamp of Sadness. Welcome to class. I'm Trevor. I post D&D videos every week on Wednesday. In this video, I wanted to continue building off of Candlekeep because that book inspired me a lot. So I've done previous videos in this series before where I've created side quests. And essentially, that's what this is. I tried to borrow the structure of this side quest from Candlekeep itself. So the intro to this video kind of breaks down how you could have your players find the book that starts this adventure, right? Nivixdeen in the Swamp of Sadness, kind of a little bit of a reference to a boy wizard book that I will not reference. Regardless, the way that this adventure plays out, and the entire adventure, which is designed for a party of 3 to 4 level 5 adventurers, is linked in a PDF in the description below. Now, I'm not going to walk through the entire adventure in this video. I'm going to just kind of give a summary of it. And if you end up playing this, or if you want the specifics, if you want the details, those will always be in the PDF that you can find. Right? I don't think a video of me reading the adventure to you is necessarily the most engaging way to show this off. In Candlekeep, the adventures that I like the most tend to go like finding the book, and then adventure overview, and then they would break down the parts of the adventure. And I tried to have the same structure for this adventure. So we already did the finding the book thing. It's a little bit different in the PDF than I introed in this video, but it's a matter of finding this kind of dusty old book that's pushed back or high up, and it seems like it hasn't been touched or used in quite some time. Now, the filigree along the spine, that web-like design, is kind of important. It's a bit of foreshadowing because the druid in this adventure, the kind of big bad for this adventure, is kind of a almost Black Widow type that's pulling people into their lair. So in terms of an adventure overview, the whole goal of this book is that this is one of the adventures where the players are going to open up the book and either one or all of the party is going to be sucked inside of the book. I left this up for DM discretion, whether or not you wanted it to pull in one person or the entire party. There are pros and cons to each of these, and it really depends on how you think your group will operate. But for the sake of expediency, it's probably easiest to have the whole group be pulled in, but I think it could add another fun layer if one person gets pulled into the book and the other people in their other parts of the library hear it and kind of come rushing over, and maybe then they open the book and something similar happens. I find that elements that are otherwise railroady in a longer campaign are sometimes permissible in a one-shot or a side quest like this. This might just be for my table, but I think having a clear sense of structure, a good like kind of plot structure, helps the players feel like there is a focus. Obviously, there are some downsides to this. And if you don't think that this would work well for your table, then adapt, modify, change it however you want. But that's kind of my mindset going into it. The players get sucked into this book. They're in a swamp. And there's this kind of semicircle arc. There are maps in the description. There's a semicircle of swamp that's fairly big, and they can explore this area. And as they're there, like once they're there, they see in front of them a bridge over the swamp itself. Now, the bridge stops in the middle of the swamp and then continues to the land on the opposite side. On the opposite side, there is an island with a fairly nondescript, somewhat on the larger side, like log cabin in the middle of the swamp. I would give the players some time to explore their surroundings at first. Initially, their obvious focus is going to be like, how do we get out of here? Now, you can run a combat encounter here. I included in the description, like in the adventure, some ideas for like them running into a shambling mound or a crocodile. It really depends on the level of your players, the experience that they have, and how much you kind of want to wear them down before they get to the big bad evil guy at the center of the swamp. The other big thing about this kind of first area, and I loosely base this off of a 5-room dungeon, although it doesn't quite break down in the same way, is that there's an NPC here, and that is Nivixdeen. So the title character from the book is found in this kind of larger area of the swamp. This character can give the PCs some information about what happened. So if you use the like students in detention kind of motif for this, then this character was a former student who maybe had a similar run-in with this book, was sucked into the book, and has watched people kind of go through the same experience and attempt to cross the bridge and try to get out that way. They have never seen someone return, and they've heard screams. They assume that people who have crossed the bridge have not made it back out, but they don't know for sure. But their kind of preservation instinct has kicked in, and they're trying to set up a life for themselves on the swamp rather than kind of fighting for getting to the opposite side. You can play this character in a lot of different ways, and I think that that flexibility is a lot of fun. You can have, like, the players might want to try to convince this person to come along with them, and they very well could do that. You could run them almost as a sidekick. The players could control this character, or you could control this character when it comes to combat. I think that that should be a little bit on the harder side because it is difficult. This person does not want to risk their lives, right? Nivixdeen is very much, maybe not a pacifist, but does want to, like a preservationist, if you can call it that, right? So there might be a conversation, there might be some tension there. Even if they don't convince Nivixdeen to help them, maybe after they defeat the druid or kind of hoodwink the druid into letting them free or what have you, maybe then they would come back and try to rescue Nivixdeen. Or even if they escape, they might bring this book to someone and let them know that there is someone else trapped in the book. It leaves some more plot threads around the book to be used for future adventures or future campaign components. At some point, and this is why I kind of have this PC or this NPC character, at some point, the PCs are going to be ushered across the bridge. Now, again, it's one of those elements. Some of you might feel like it's a little railroady. I don't necessarily have a problem with it for my game and for my players. I think that they would find this overall campaign, like this overall module, a kind of fun romp through a swamp, and I don't think that they would have a problem with it. There's some ideas for encounters across the bridge. They could have combat across the bridge. There could even be something tempting in the water that could maybe lure them off of the bridge. And then the second half of the bridge, my plan would be to have that part of the bridge snap. Not necessarily as in a trap, because that kind of defeats the purpose. If the druid is trying to lure people, they wouldn't have a trapped bridge. But I would say more so because of the weight or because of just the age of the ropes or what have you. More of a mechanical break than a trap style break. And then the characters would have to make like dexterity throws. They might fall in the water. They might have to try to swim. It creates some dynamic component. Now, you might not want to do both of those things. Maybe you have a combat encounter or you have the bridge break. I wouldn't do both necessarily, but it really depends on how quickly your group is going. If your group lands, sees the bridge, and immediately beelines it across the bridge, then you have plenty of time to do both of those options. I just don't think it's necessarily required to do both. Once they get to the other side of the bridge, they're now on an island with the cabin. And the island itself can be investigated. They could find some objects, maybe some potions or a weapon. And again, there are ideas in the description, but they could also, if they look hard enough or get a high enough investigation check, they could find a back door to this cabin. And the back door would let them get a way in that would surprise the druid. Technically speaking, if they can get in the back door and be sneaky enough, they might even be able to find the trap door and subsequently the way out without alerting the druid. But at the very least, they could sneak up on the druid, which would be helpful if they're engaging in combat with him or with them. Once they're inside of the cabin, then and to be clear, the front door of the cabin is wide open. My thought for the big bad for this campaign or this module is that they're trying to lure people to them, almost like a spider, right? They're pulling people like their prey and they're almost toying with them. I didn't give too much of a physical description of the druid. I kind of left that vague so you could kind of fill that in how you wanted, but I want them to be almost sly, methodical, fairly intelligent, and manipulative and like creepy, right? Like that's the kind of vibe that I was going for with this character. Now, they have no reason, they're not trying to keep the PCs out of their house. They want them to come in, they want to be able to kill them. And if the PCs come in, maybe there's a brief bout of conversation, and I think combat would happen pretty quickly. This druid, at least based on my understanding of this character, my idea for this character, this druid is quick to anger and wants to kind of feast on their prey. You have some options here in terms of whether or not this is the actual druid, or if this is maybe a simulacra or some sort of enchantment that the druid created, and the druid is maybe out there and has created this book and left it behind as a trap. I think that that's a really cool way to turn this book into not just a one-shot, but a longer adventure. The battle with the druid happens. I created an action-oriented stat block so the druid can fight with them and also kind of create webs, and it's this whole ordeal. I'm hoping that it's a dynamic combat encounter. There's also a stat block for a slightly modified giant spider that the druid could turn into. It doesn't necessarily have to use that form. I just think it makes sense given the motifs that I've been going for through this entire campaign or module. The one physical description that I did give for the druid that I do think is important is around their neck, they're wearing a leather-strapped amulet, and that amulet has 4 vials. In each of these vials, there are a bit of each element. So there's some fire, water, earth, and air in these vials around the druid's neck. The reason why this is important is because after the combat with the druid, after an investigation check of the cabin, or if they sneak through and investigate the cabin, underneath the bed, there is a trap door that is marked with symbols that match the elements: earth, water, wind, and fire. And the kind of puzzle to get out is that the players need to activate these symbols by touching the elements to them, right? So if they cast a firebolt on or near this trapdoor, the fire symbol would light up. Now, they don't need to use the vials that are around the druid's neck to solve this puzzle. As a matter of fact, a kind of good tip is if you're planning a puzzle for your players, do not plan it with a completely closed end. Right? If-then statements are a nightmare. Instead, plan options or possibilities. And the vials are one way the players could solve this puzzle. And it would make sense that the druid themselves would have a way to kind of pop in and out of this plane, especially if it is the real druid and not like a simulacra of some kind. But they don't have to do it that way. They could get earth from just dirt outside. They could breathe onto the air symbol, which would light that up. There's a lot of flexibility here, and that's kind of the whole point. I want to award their creativity if they're playing and kind of enjoying it and being fun with it. Now, after this all happens, assuming the players find their way out, whether it's through defeating the druid or sneaking past the druid, whatever the case may be, they're going to pop back out to wherever they found the book. Again, in the campaign description, that's a library where they were in detention, kind of a wizard school feel. And now there's a lot of questions that still can be answered, right? In Candlekeep Mysteries, there's a section at the end of most of the adventures about like what to do next or where could this go. And the players could talk to someone who has some authority at the school or the library, wherever they found the book, and they could ask them who the druid was or how long the book has been there, who donated this book. And this, again, could turn into a longer campaign. Maybe this druid is actually out there. Maybe this is a trap set by a wizard or a cult or whatever. My goal with this game was that it could be played as a one-shot or as a game that could slot in and be integrated into a more complex campaign setting. Either way is perfectly fine. And if you do end up running this, or modifying it and running some version of it, even if you just use the druid or use some of the maps, let me know in the comments below. I'd really appreciate it. But as always, be safe. Make smart life choices.